Welcome along, my aspiring allies. Thank you for joining me today on this most recent episode of the Speaking of Inclusion podcast. So I have just wrapped recording my episode with Cynthia Fortlage. She has been an amazing guest. So Cynthia runs CAF services, and gosh, the conversation we've just had, which is what you're going to listen to in just a minute, was fantastic. And we just ran out of time to cover all of the amazing stuff. So if, as you're listening to it, you think, oh, I want to know more about that, don't worry. I'm making a list of things that I want to carry on the conversation with Cynthia with. And I think we're going to get a follow up in at some point in the future because she has got some amazing insight to share, especially around kind of gender identity and gender education, and also some of her own experiences. So it's been fantastic. So to introduce to you formally, now I have waxed lyrical about Cynthia. So Cynthia Fortlage, she uses the pronouns she and her, and she is a Belfast-born Canadian-raised global gender diversity speaker and consultant. She's now based in London and is the founder of CAF Services. With over 30 years' experience in technology, Cynthia is an expert in simplifying processes, strategic planning, and leadership. She also specialises in creating inclusive corporate cultures that promote human rights, gender diversity, and sexuality. Despite being a white lesbian woman with a trans plus history, Cynthia has been recognised as an international award-winning LGBT plus executive board leader and speaker. She has delivered over 475 engagements in more than 30 countries since 2017, and she has held leadership positions in prominent organisations, one of which is the Rainbow Resource Centre in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And she's also part of the Women's March Canada, a feminist organisation where she serves as the national chair. She is a board member of Outright International, a global LGBTQ plus human rights organisation, and the United Nations Secretariat on LGBTQIA plus issues. Cynthia's exceptional track record speaks for itself, and her unwavering commitment to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is genuinely inspiring. And I can tell you, having just spent an hour speaking to her for the second time, she really is an inspirational person to be listening to, although she won't accept that herself, which is fascinating to me too. So without further ado, I would like to hand you over to Cynthia Fortlage so that you can listen to us talking about acceptance without understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was at I was invited into a group called the League of Extraordinary Women.
Ooh.
And what a group. It was just amazing. So yeah.
How, what is that group? Who is it? Who
Uh,
is it?
um, Eleanor is the lady that invited me. It was a connection of a connection.
Yeah.
And Eleanor, we had a chat, and she has this group, and she said, after meeting me, she said, "I'd like you to be part of this group." So yeah, so we went and met some. Well, I meet amazing women no matter where I go. Like it's just it's but yeah, this is a particular group that she's curated and I'm now part of, and yeah, it was like wow. But you know, I could say the same for whether it's the girls club that I belong to and the amazing events that Joanne, the founder of that group, you know, invites me into. Sisters before that, which is an Emma Sale company organization, and you know, which again was just women in business supporting women. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Those spaces are good, aren't they? I find when you get people who are kind of united around like shared success,
yes,
the vibes are good.
totally.
Yeah.
And I'm all about finding places that are not only obviously accepting, but also are uplifting. In other words, there's not the competitiveness that and I've written a blog post about it. It's really it, almost passe, but it's like I wrote it from the perspective of women in sport because there's a lot of conversation, especially in the gender space, about women in
Yeah.
sport. And to me, it's about a lack of resources that we've constantly made to fight for. And so, you know, especially when we talk about, you know, high level, high performance
Mhm.
sports, etc., it there's not the same opportunities for women. So there is a limited resource that we're going after compared to, say, men's sport.
Yeah.
So in that case, of course, women are going to be, much more um, passionate, right,
Yeah.
about that limited resource.
Yeah.
Um,
Protective over it because there's not
yeah,
enough. There wasn't enough to go around to begin with.
exactly. And we see it in everything. It doesn't make sense at the low end where it's not competitive, where it's just simply a
Yeah.
matter of physical education.
Yeah.
And why are we taking that away from some individuals and preventing people from participating? But anyways, I
Yeah.
don't think that was the point of us talking today, but it's
No,
just,
but it's super interesting, so that's staying in.
yeah.
But things like that, I love those kind of conversations, and I don't know if you find as well, like I certainly do since I've started working more in kind of, I'll call it the DEI space, but anything that centers around inclusion and equitable
Hmm.
outcomes, people tend to be much less competitively focused, and coaching spaces are quite like that as well. Not seeing each other as like, oh yeah, well if you get business, I'm not going to get business. It's more along the lines of, yeah, how can we get each other kind of more visible? How can I refer people to you? Where do you refer people back to? And
Yeah,
it's so much more collaborative than in
right.
other spaces.
See, that's intriguing because my experience when I coached, because I coached
Mm.
2017 to 2021, and it was at the end of 2021 I left, primarily because I was taking on too much emotional baggage from
Mm,
the people I was coaching. So,
yeah.
um, but what I found was the competitiveness of out certifying or accrediting as
Oh,
coaches
yeah.
was what I experienced. At least from a marketing
Interesting.
perspective, it was so. I mean, because I learned that over those years, I've applied that in the work I do, and
Mm,
so I highlight the things that I think makes me unique. I.e., I've never met another C-suite level executive who came out as trans ever.
yeah.
I've heard that they exist, but I've never met one.
Yeah.
So, there's that perspective. So that makes me a bit of a unicorn with that.
Yep, for sure.
Um, I know that I'm not the first, but I don't think there's many trans women that have led feminist movements, representing all women, cisgender and
Yes.
trans.
Yeah.
Um, and so I know but that's a very unique perspective because I did that before I ever learned to fight for LGBTQ rights because I was in the process of coming out and transitioning.
Mm,
I wasn't at the point that I was able to stand up for others other than I could stand up for women because immediately my experiences in the corporate world where I instantly began being treated as a woman and it
yeah.
was such a shock compared to how I was treated as a man.
Yeah.
And that was like, no. And so
Yeah.
over the three and a half years that I was involved with the movement, up to the point where I was the national leader, that really shaped a lot of the foundation for what I do. And then, of course, I have my own lived experiences as well over the past 8 years that shapes how I encounter it. But I encounter it with a great deal of privilege, and I know that.
Mm,
And I'm very respectful of the fact where my privilege allows me to be, and honestly, some safety that I get from the privilege that I carry.
yeah. I mean, I find that like fascinating in the sense of that we all know that these kind of the perspectives and these privileges exist, but you have got this absolute unique perspective, haven't
Yeah,
you? Of like, say, I have firsthand experience the difference. I got treated this way,
yeah,
and now I get treated this way. Like that, you can't argue with that. Like,
yeah,
there's no
yeah,
that's like, no, this is all real. I
yeah,
totally experienced it. Here you go. Can you
yeah.
expand on that? Like, it's like
Sure.
examples to bring that to life a little bit for people.
Well, first of all, I mean, it's one of the reasons again, learning to leverage it, right? It's one of the
Yeah,
hardest things, right? So that's why I call myself one leader with two genders worth of experience.
yeah,
But that's not unique to me. That's unique to every trans person. They all
absolutely.
have that superpower. Um, but yeah, example. So I usually share a couple of examples right off the top. So the first one I always talk about is everybody always has asked me when I do Q&A, what's the first recognition of the loss of male privilege? And the answer is safety. Now,
Mm,
just so you understand, this happened 1 week after I'd come out. So I was living socially as me, and quote, during the workday for a period of time, I was still presenting as him.
okay.
And so when I was walking down the street, without another woman teaching me and so forth, but I found that it is the same, is I learned to be wary, even if I'm on the high street during the middle of the day, surrounded by people, and I'm having to be very conscious every moment of who's walking towards me, how are they reading or interpreting, am I at risk? Always
Hmm.
checking, am I being followed? Right? I'm looking at who's walking on the other side of the street. Is somebody going to make a beeline, a tangent across the street towards me that I need to be worried about? I'm analyzing the street to where's the exits? Where could I run to if I had to? Now, the one benefit was that in North America, um, I mean, the streets aren't perfect, but they're very different than in London.
Yeah.
Um, with London, a lot of the cobblestone and everything else. So what I found was I used to wear heels all the time. Everywhere I went, I'd just be walking in heels. And so the question of, well, do I kick them off? Do I leave them behind? I love my heels.
Mm,
Do I pick them up? Do I use them as a weapon?
yeah.
I mean, clearly in a male world, this whole conversation never exists.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
There is a question which is much more about common sense that you don't walk down a dark alley late at
Yeah.
night.
Yeah.
But the question of what I just explained didn't. So when I do workshops and I ask men to visualize audiences, but primarily I'm targeting the men,
Mm,
and I ask them to visualize this idea of safety and who resonates. And certainly, cis het men, cisgender heterosexual men don't get this.
yeah.
That they have never experienced it yet. I find, and many people I've spoken to resonate, that it's not just walking down the street, it's the moment I leave my front door. And of course, we know from statistics that not every woman is even safe in her own home,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Unfortunately.
uh,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to take it down that, but we have to recognize that that is a part of safety. It's not
Yeah.
just our front door. We need our environment to be
Yeah.
safe. So that's one example. Another one is I talk about my first experience in the boardroom as me. So I attend my first meeting. Like many meetings before, we talked about the business of the day and the financials, and then we start these ideation sessions. We're addressing a common day-to-day business problem or an
Mhm.
opportunity. And so somebody had put the problem on the table and defined it. Now, of course, at this point, I was the head of technology, so we
Mhm.
tended to be involved in a lot of business.
Yep.
And the idea kind of started at one person, and then it went to the next, and they ideated upon that, and it got to me, and I shared my idea, and I put it on the table, and there was complete silence, not even a hmm. Now, the gentleman beside me restated my idea.
Oh, yeah. There it is.
Okay. And everybody loved it. And they went. And so I was presented for the very first time
Yeah.
the problem of, do I speak up and go, excuse me, that was my suggestion? And then I would be known as that petty little you know what, just looking for attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I put the idea on the table for the purpose of helping the business. And so we went with it. And I also knew, as the head of that portfolio of technology, that the answer, if it came back and involved the technological solution, it's coming back into my portfolio to take
Yeah.
it to the next step. So do I just, which is the second conundrum, do I just stay quiet?
Do I let it go?
Do
Yeah.
I let it go? And unfortunately, for the audience, I did let it go. And I let a man speak for me. And it was in that I realized that the second epiphany of that moment was that not only did I have that first epiphany, the second was I needed to have a male ally in the boardroom in
Mm,
order to be heard.
yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And like the kind of the overlap between those two things as well is when you don't have that kind of lived experience or perspective of what it feels like to be on the other side of it, it's
Yeah.
really hard to be an ally, isn't it, if it's not
Oh,
spelled
yeah.
out for you sometimes? Because how do you know that those behaviors exist
Right.
until you see them and go like, oh shit, there it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, another example that I use when in some of my workshops is I do a physical exercise, which is the way that women normally sit in position, right? And so I've obviously had to deconstruct it all in order to understand it. And so the whole idea is to ask the audience, again, helping men understand to, stop man spreading, bring your legs together. No, you won't crush anything. Bring them together. Your body actually knows what to do. Make sure you sit up straight. Oh, pull your body in. Think small. You want your body to be felt small. You don't want to go outside. And you need to make sure that you're taking up as much, as little space as possible. And oh, by the way, when you want to get someone's attention, don't do the man thing and raise your hand all the way up. I want you just to go like this. Like,
Oh yeah. Be
can you pay?
apologetic about how you raise a hand, please.
Right, because God forbid I actually have a point of view and a
Yeah.
contribution to make at the table.
And
Being
before
more,
you make it, could
yeah,
you please pre-qualify, and apologize for the fact that you might be about to say something of use? Like,
yes, yeah. So, anyways, I take them through a physical exercise, and when I ask most of the audience, and again, I focus on the men with this particular exercise. I do exercises with women too, but
mm,
this one is about. So, how do you feel? And like men talk about, they feel so cramped and so restrained in the whole bit, and I go like, do you understand why that you're sitting that way? And so we go back and we start to deconstruct some of it. And I talk about the safety and the perceptions from a male perspective that's put upon. Well, if you sit like that, well, then you're asking for it, right? Oh, well, if you're wearing that, you've got that short skirt and you don't have your legs crossed and keeping your legs tight together. Well, that must mean you want it.
mm,
And on and on and on.
yeah,
And it's like you kind of see them go, okay, I get it now. And
yeah,
so, yeah, those kinds of experiences of being the one leader with two genders and deconstructing everything so that I can learn it
mm,
is it's giving me an unbelievable insight.
absolutely.
um, so when I come into corporations, I kind of take all of that perspective. I take my feminist perspective and I take my corporate C-suite executive, which I mean, I did that for 20 years. So I kind of know how to do business and bring it all together for the purpose of saying, okay, let's look at an organization and apply all of that knowledge and expertise in helping them, perhaps do something different, or at least analyze it through both sets of gendered eyes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's fantastic work, and I love that you're able to share those kind of really concrete examples of like, here are experiences, here are physical feelings that you can have in your body, and here's like, here, how do you relate to those things? How does it make you feel? And then what does that make you think about the
Yeah.
interactions you might have with people going forward? Like, it's so real for
Yeah.
people to be able to understand. Yeah. Yeah, because half the time that's one of my concerns is like it's really easy to get stuck in an academic conversation about something, which keeps it like at distance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, how
Yeah.
can we talk about gender issues, but we'll talk about them as if there's something over
Right.
there, not as if there's something that we're all like encountering all of the time on account of we've all been assigned a gender.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. And if I can pick up on that point, it's there is no denying, quote, that biological component, but it's intriguing that if you think about it, when we're born, they somewhere along the way, somebody decided that the doctor's going to take you, hold you by your ankles, and make a determination of, quote, your gender. Now, in saying that, that is an assumption of who you are, how you perceive yourself. That is an assumption of how you're going to dress and represent yourself, i.e., do you actually look like a woman? When I say that, that is a very think long hair, think makeup, think pretty, not smart, right? On
yeah,
and on and on. And so all of these concepts are implied based upon that one element of, quote, a body part,
mm,
without realizing that. And I always raise this in the conversation, is that when we talk biologically, it is intriguing that everybody forgets that, okay, you want to minimize some of the aspects for the 0.5% of the quote trans community. But how can you ignore the biological considerations of 2% of the population, which are the intersex population? In almost every nation, they make up about 2% of the population. They're naturally born this way. It is
Mm.
all biologically.
Yep.
And so you may have someone that is born that looks like a woman that does have a vagina, but doesn't have a uterus. She
Mm.
is not born with a uterus. So this question that comes up that everybody loves to throw out, this distraction of, well, what is a woman? Well,
Mm.
I don't know. I relate it to something that one of my friends said, and she said, Cynthia, I know you're a woman, heart and soul, you are a woman. And to me, it really said, yeah, like it is to a degree that deep, because I have addressed, quote, all the physical attributes, and I've changed them. Because
Mm.
guess what? We actually started out that way in the first place, so I'm just undoing. Um,
Yeah.
and so the realization that I am coming back to really my center, my beginning point,
Mm.
before whatever happened that caused my
Yeah.
body to quote have a different internal perception of who I was, to how I was physically born. But again, that whole story gives you an amazing intrigue to think about how we make all of these broad assumptions, which again really speaks to the social construct nature of gender, right?
Mm.
Um, and how we go. So, like when I talk about that, I ask people, did you know that prior to the 1940s, that every baby born was wrapped in a pink blanket?
Mm.
Somewhere around the 40s, they had boys in blue blankets and girls in pink blanket. Prior to that, every baby was in a pink blanket.
I mean, a blanket's a blanket, right?
But of course it is. It is. But for some reason, color became a key
Yeah.
consideration, right?
Ooh.
But we can even take it further back. If we go back into the times of chattel slavery and so forth, and we look at it, think about the term boy. Boy was not used to describe a male child. In fact, all children were described with a feminine girl variation. Boy was reserved for male slaves.
Oh.
So even the idea of, well, what is a boy has changed to accommodate this social construct to fit the
Yeah.
narrative.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow. Do you know, I often find myself
mm,
saying like everything is made up. Like
yes,
because it is, right? And
it
the
is.
more I learn about things like this, is like
Yeah,
everything is made up and it only means the things it means to us currently because of this little window of life that we're looking at it through.
yeah.
And that's simply the view that we've got right now. And sometimes that expands, sometimes it shifts, sometimes it moves, but
Hmm.
everything's made up, like everything.
Well,
And
sure,
we get so locked into it, don't we? Like, yeah, but
we
look at
do.
what I can see. This is fact. Like, well, it's fact right now.
But it hasn't always been. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I talk about that when I talk about history, queer history,
Mm.
LGBTQ history. It's intriguing because this year it seemed to be a bit of a shock for people because I start 10,000 years ago. Now,
Awesome.
I think human history is dated around 14,000 years ago. So this is history that's been recorded 10,000 years ago and being passed along within indigenous North American communities. And they have a term, an English term. So this is a colonizer's word put upon the community, but it's been accepted in English that they're referred to as two-spirit people.
Mm. Yeah.
And because they don't all use, quote, the LGBTQ plus rainbow alphabet, as I love to call it, my rainbow family.
Yeah.
Um, they are two-spirited people. And they may be any variety of combinations, but they're all two-spirit. And the interesting part that I was taught by Indigenous elders, and this was an early lesson when I first came out in 2016, was the fact that in the simplest language for the two-spirited people, they had 5 words for gender. They had
Right.
a female and male, male but female, female but male, male but female, neither male nor female. So
Yeah.
today, the words we use of non-binary, gender non-conforming, were allowed for in society's language 10,000 years ago. So
Right.
it's not new.
Not new.
Eh,
I mean, it's very not
Right.
new.
No, no. In fact, what is new is the concepts that were brought. And I use the example in Canada, the accent's Canadian for anyone that's
Mhm.
watching, was the fact of realizing that Canada, these Indigenous people existed forever, as far as we know, in that space. But until colonization hit Canada, the fact is that that's when colonizers' world, that's when religion and everything was brought to the space, meaning that we're talking history on a global basis of a binary thinking construct. This, as you say, current is only 600 years old,
Right.
right? But
Wow.
yeah, but to throw you a different angle, um,
Oh, please.
what about um, what we call, you hear a lot these days. You're hearing a lot about um, in within nations. You're hearing like this is not this nation's values and so forth, right? These
Okay.
are
Yeah.
not family value. Like those are all simply, political dog whistles to talk about a very definitive um, point of view,
Hmm.
and they're not actually representing the mass. And very much it has a number of actors behind the scenes that are propagating this globally, because I know of at least 33 countries that we could talk about it, that this is happening right now. But
Right.
the point is, when we think in that conversation about um, you know, feminism and women's right and participation in society. I just learned this year by revisiting an amazing book, and really what it did is it said the first documented evidence of quote a traditional women's role, and again think 1950s and
Hmm.
prior, a traditional women's role actually comes from Homer's Odyssey, written 3000 BCE. And in there, the son Telemachus tells his mother Penelope, upon her descending the stairs and hearing some very morose music as they're still waiting for Homer to return, that she says, stop playing this music, like play something joyful. I'm interpreting in modern day language,
Yeah.
but it's Telemachus says, Mother, go upstairs and do women's work, and proceeds to define some, quote, traditional
Mm.
women's things to do it. He says, I am the voice of this household, and I am the voice of politics.
Oh.
So when we talk about even women's right, whether it's queer women's right,
Mm.
just women's rights, wreck it for all of us. We are fighting not the last 100 years or 150 years of the women's movement or the
Yeah.
50 years for the pay gap legislation that we still don't have pay equity, but we are actually fighting over 3,000
Yeah.
years of history that is really what's shaping us. That's the now that we're actually
Yeah.
fighting against. Realize that that wasn't always the case because it was different before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's so fascinating. And may I ask, because you
yeah,
mentioned referring back to a book, you were revisited. So what was the
yeah.
book?
Um, it's by Mary Beard,
Ah, okay.
right? And it's really her feminist manifesto. I think it's Women in Power, if I
Mhm.
remember this title correctly. But yeah, it literally, she tells the story in the first 2 pages, and it's just like, wow, like
Yeah.
yeah,
Because I was really curious to ask because it reminded me of a few years ago I was introduced to Gerda Lerner and the book
okay,
The Creation of Patriarchy.
okay,
Um, and she makes reference to, and I'm gonna get this really wrong because I'm absolutely pulling it like somewhere from right back here.
okay,
But she makes reference to kind of societies living quite harmoniously, and then this is like, I don't know, however, like I can't even put a date on it, like very, very long ago when we
yeah,
didn't really have the tools and the ability to do much with each other. And it was only when encountering kind of nearing villages, or I'm going to go with tribes, even though I hate that word,
Yeah.
where there was that need to protect oneself, and it became a way of kind of integrating neighboring villages with one another, because they noticed that there was less cohesion amongst groups when men joined from one village to another, because
Yeah.
they had less skin in the game, literally, as to when a woman joined from one tribe to another, because they had the ability to bear children. And it's almost
Yeah.
like this
Right.
recognition of actually survival and collaboration was greater
Yeah.
between neighboring, potentially conflicting villages when the exchange of women took place,
Mm-hmm.
rather than the exchange of generally prisoners and people.
Yeah.
And that it kind of started then to create this hierarchy within
Oh,
societies on
okay.
that basis. It's just something that she was talking about. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
God, that's fascinating, in the sense of like, actually, yeah, we all had roles, we did things, but it was
Yeah.
just everybody was kind of contributing to society. And it was
Right.
only once we had to start bargaining and bartering for survival that these differences started to be teased out. And it was kind of like, oh, well, this is a useful survival tactic.
Yeah.
And it starts to shift.
Yeah. See, what I find intriguing about that is I'm not aware of that particular
Mm.
story, but if you ever, again, we started off talking about being in these rooms with these groups of amazing women. And quite honestly, any room
Yeah.
I'm in with women is typically a group of amazing women.
Yeah.
But what I found was the intriguing point of view, and I make the specific observation, again, a lived experience, in a room
Mm.
of 150 women. And the vibe and the conversation of the way it was flowing in the room, and one man enters the space, and
Mm.
literally everybody makes room for him in his voice.
Mm.
And he completely changed the entire room.
Yeah. The dynamic shifts.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, and that's learned behavior, right? Isn't
Yeah.
it? That's societally created learned behavior. And like you say, purely based upon the fact that at some point someone with a few years of medical experience
Mm-hmm.
took a look at what's between our legs, made a declaration, and that
Yeah.
dictated the entire course of the rest of our lives.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Look, that's
It
a lot of power, actually. So I think maybe
yeah.
we need a little message to some of the I guess what kind of pediatrics so
Yeah.
going on. It's like,
Obstetricians and
thank you. Yeah, there we go.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like, my medical knowledge
That's
isn't very
okay.
good. If it wasn't in Grey's Anatomy, I'm not entirely sure. So that's my frame of reference for everything. I could do an
Okay.
emergency tracheotomy, but don't ask me to tell you, who decides
Okay.
what gender a baby is.
I'll keep you
Um,
on speed dial.
yeah, exactly. If you ever need something, if
Yeah.
you're ever impaled at height, I could
Yeah.
probably sort you out.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, but so and I find that fascinating. I just find it fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
When these huge, literally life-determining decisions
Right.
are, sometimes best guess
Right.
of someone's understanding and definitions and education, and that's quite a lot, I think, for to place upon people, isn't it? Really?
And yeah, and I think that it's not a matter of saying, well, did they get it wrong? Well, if they get it wrong, the error rate is not 0.5.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so first of all, kudos to you. You're right
Yeah.
99.5% of the time.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah.
But you can't be 100% right. That would make you perfect. I don't know a human being that's perfect. So
Doesn't exist.
you know what? A not 0.5% misdiagnose rate? Sure. And guess what? We're all trans. So, which is
Yeah.
why I talk about, acceptance without understanding. It's like,
Yes.
look, trust me, the day the epiphany hit me, the proverbial, and I've changed the language to it, but that, kind of, oh my God, I'm a woman in a man's body kind of thing. What I learned, and it took me about 3-4 months, was no, let me correct that. I'm a woman in my own body, and I have a couple of birth defects that thankfully medical science can address to bring me in alignment. So for me, I didn't
Mm.
look in a mirror and see myself till I was 52 years old, because
Mm.
that's when I looked like me, the person I'd always seen in my head.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we have that, but that whole challenge of really kind of perceiving the way society sees us, and we evolve, it really challenges the idea of saying, okay, we're so complex as human beings. We're obviously not the way we look and you know, our genitalia. We're much more complex as
Yeah.
human beings. There's so many elements to
Yeah.
us. How can you possibly think you understand all of my elements better than I do? And look, let's agree, we probably both don't understand all our elements really well anyway.
Right.
But to think you actually know someone else better, which is the acceptance, right? And again, that is a societal construct, because think of how we go to school, or even before school, we're talking to our parents, especially two terrible twos, right? And it's like, why is this guy blue? Why is this? Why? Right? And we go through that why phase and go to school. We want to learn. And so we learn to ask questions, right? Why is a question we ask to gain understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in my role as a technology executive, we had a troubleshooting technique called the 7 Why
Mm-hmm.
technique, which gets to root cause analysis.
Yep.
So as a society, we are built upon understanding in order to accept something.
Yes, we are.
But for a human being being so complex beyond our
Yeah.
understanding, what you do have a choice is to accept without understanding. And by doing so, you create a safe space to have a conversation that, again, I'm simplifying the whole process, but you create the opportunity for this safe space to have a conversation. And through the conversation, you arrive at acceptance with understanding. Just to clarify, acceptance does not mean tolerating, and it does not mean agreeing. A lot of people think, oh, well, I'm asking you. No, I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to accept. When I tell you that my name is Cynthia, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a woman with a trans history, as that's how I describe myself, that's who I am.
Yeah.
Right? As I tell my friends that I've had for over 30 years, I go, when we talk about memories and that, don't refer to me for who I was, refer to me for who I am, because I still have all those memories. I still have that experience. And while I may not have been called Cynthia and look like this, I was there.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
always there.
Yeah.
And so the acceptance without understanding is the call to action to say, can we put aside that judgment?
Mm.
Much like the doctor who made
Yeah.
that initial, and go, I may have thought something, but it may not have been right.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to learn, not to
Mm-hmm.
agree, right? I'm
Yeah.
just willing to go, okay, I
Yeah.
understand where this person's coming from. And while I don't agree with it, that doesn't change their identity.
Yeah.
It just changes my perception of their identity, right? And
Yeah.
again, I can't make somebody change their mind. I can
Mm.
only provide information and knowledge, and in doing so, create an opportunity for them to do it. But that also means, even for, quote, the negative people, right? What sometimes are called the haters, you need to create a safe space
Yeah.
for them to feel safe, to not hate, and to think about it.
Mm. Yeah. And exactly as you were saying, it's about creating that space where you can have a conversation,
Yeah.
you know, where you can um ask questions, put
Mm-hmm.
across your understanding as it stands, you know,
Yeah.
your perspective. And I think we get, and again, this is another societal thing, isn't it? Like, we really love polar opposites. We love binary thinking. We love it. It's going to be this or it's going to be this, and one is right and one is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I find, certainly, that I
Yeah.
learn about people and human identity and just, well, anything, quite frankly,
Right.
anything, you know, I, life's just not that way. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there are like these kind of little tips of things, and then there's this massive grey area in the middle that we just
Yeah.
don't know enough about. Multiple things can be true at the same time,
Yep.
just depending on who we are and what our perspective is.
Right.
And I find that once I kind of understood that, it made it a
Mm-hmm.
lot easier to just let go
Yep.
of, you know, when people come at you sometimes with like, why would you think that? Like, and I'm just like, well, because I do. I'm like, if you're
Right.
going to give me other information, that I'll take it on board and I'll think about it. I may
Right.
or may not change my mind. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like, I totally get where I can see where you're coming from and why you think that I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
I don't expect you to agree with me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not going to change my day.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? I can actually be friends with some of those people. We
Yeah.
just won't agree on that one point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Because we're not one thing, are we? We
right.
are
No.
huge, beautiful, complex
Yeah.
creatures.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's part of the curse of being human, isn't it? Like we are so flipping brilliant that we've almost out-brillianced ourselves in our
Yeah.
capacity to hold all this information and examine things and overthink things
Yeah.
and have our
Yeah.
feelings hurt.
But you see, it's intriguing. Let me draw you a parallel from my business consulting part
Yeah.
of my life. You know, if you think back to probably, you know, early days, whenever we learned about negotiation, right? It was a win-lose, much like you talked about, right? And then in, you know, teaching, we said, well, let's go for the win-win, which means kind of, if you will, the buyer and the seller both win, right? And you can kind of, the seller gets a sale that they're happy with, and the buyer gets whatever they've acquired at a price they're happy with.
Yep.
What I teach is a win-win-win philosophy
Okay.
in negotiation, which means you have those two ends of the buyer and the seller, but in between you have two human beings that have a relationship that they need to be successful in the eyes of, quote, the parties they're representing in the process of the negotiation, right? So when I was a C-suite executive, I would say to the person I was negotiating with, so, you know, what do you need to get out of this deal to be a hero to your employer?
Yeah.
And then I would tell them what I need to get out of it. And the idea is, can we meld those things together so that as the company buying said product or service, they got what they wanted, and the seller gets a sale, but in between we both get what we needed out of this relationship that doesn't leave us leaving the table going, well, you know, one of us lost, one of us won. And
Yeah.
in the eyes of the people literally that we were working for, you know, that we accomplished. And so that is a much more complex, and again, it's a much more widely accepted understanding of great negotiation technique of a win-win-win. But yet you apply that, as you said, to human beings in the diversity space, when we talk about inclusion and so forth, and all of a sudden it becomes problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's so interesting because that it requires so much vulnerability though, doesn't it? Because we are kind of conditioned, aren't we, to be like, oh, this is my pile of gold and I shall protect it. Let me
Yeah.
stand in front of it. And I don't want you to see how much is there.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and we kind of, we keep everything very much secretly. And what you're saying, like I'm hearing there, is actually, if I come in and say to you, right, okay, so this is my pile of gold.
Yeah.
And what I need to come out of this with is more gold or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, or here, and
Right.
here's what I need. You show me what you've got, like show me your hand, I'll show you my hand, and we'll
Yeah.
both make sure that we come out of this beating the dealer. Or, you know, it's kind
Right.
of like
Yeah.
how can we figure this out together rather than
Yeah.
everything having to be conflicting.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so um that
Love
that is a bit of what shapes my thinking today, is all of that, you know,
that.
it was 20 years as a C-suite senior executive, you know, 30 years in that industry that really taught me a lot of these things. And so when I moved into the diversity space, I started encountering these things. It's like, hang on, there's a model for that, and really to look at it. But yeah, the origin specifically of acceptance without understanding is much more personal,
Yeah.
in that it actually came from the dissolution of my 32-year marriage, unfortunately, as a result of me coming out.
Right.
And there, I won't go into all the details, but simply put, after 16 months of working through couples therapy and everything else, trying to find an answer, at the end, there was no doubt that we both still loved each other.
Yeah.
But understandably, she couldn't accept who I was, for a number of reasons. And what it taught me was that love's not enough. And so you need love, and acceptance is kind of the true love, or a word we use especially with our children, unconditional love.
Yeah.
Because I'll give you a personal example. Was, you know, I'm a parent. I have two children, a son and a daughter, both adults in Canada. And one of the aspects was that, you know, certainly when my daughter was born, I, you know, saw a father-daughter dance, walking her down the aisle in my head. And along the way, if I put those ideas into her head and we ever kind of talked about, doing this father-daughter dance, whatever, that is my expectation I'm putting upon her. That's not what she wanted. So
Mm,
when I came out, we had to rehab that conversation knowing there's not a father-daughter dance, right? Um,
yeah,
and she said, leave it with her. She will reimagine it. And it's like, yeah, because she's an adult. And this is about her life and her dreams, not me imposing my
yeah,
wishes, desires. And so whether my children come out as gay or trans or whatever, that doesn't affect the fact they're my child. Yet
yeah.
my own experience was when I came out to my parents, I looked my father in the eye and I had to say, but I'm still your child. And he looked at me and just said, no, I don't get it. I can't.
Mm, sorry
And
to hear
that,
that.
yeah, well, I mean, that's just part of the journey,
Mm,
of traveling it. But I wanted to make sure my kids never have to experience that. But even more so, I don't want another child to have to experience that from parents or caregivers. I don't want another
yeah,
human being to have to experience that in a work environment and to find out they don't belong just simply because they are who they are. Like,
yeah,
really? Like, those are just such vile, vile ways to treat another human being. And
yeah.
that's honestly what wakes me up every day to make me do the work I do.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
And I think, and I love the way you've, so thank you for giving us the background, because when we spoke previously ahead of this and you were talking about acceptance without
Yeah.
understanding, it really stayed with me. And so thank you for sharing how you arrived at that as
Yeah.
well, because I can see why. It makes absolute sense. And I think that's something that's going to resonate with a lot of people as well, because we all want to, we use the term, like you say, don't we, unconditional love, like
Right.
absolutely. But I think very rarely, if we really, really drill down into it, do we hold unconditional love for other people.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever had ourselves challenged enough to kind of really think like, what would it take for me to absolutely just love a person?
Hmm.
And I really like that that's what you're bringing into the world, to be like, this is a position we can occupy and we should occupy.
Yeah.
um just have love.
Yeah, it is. But it requires us all to do what I call the deep work, and we need to grow.
Yeah, and that's not easy and it's not quick, is
Oh,
it? Let's be honest, there's no
it
magic pill.
no, and it doesn't feel good, right?
No, it doesn't. No, as
No.
someone who is, yeah, I feel like I'm constant. I know I hate the term journey. We're all on a journey,
Yeah,
right? It
we
makes me
are.
throw up in my mouth a little bit, but it's true. There's no better word for it.
Yeah,
I've found either, like and it is constant, and that just when you think like you've got your head around something, you
yeah,
get presented with the next thing, and you're like, oh, okay, I'll factor that in now. Then I'll think
yeah,
about like, oh yeah, no, now that does challenge my thoughts on that.
yeah.
Interesting. I'll have to sit with it for a bit longer.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I still find that today. Like I just said, it's a journey, so you're never done. Um,
Mm.
so when you start this journey of
Yeah,
discovery and deep work, be prepared. You're going to do it till your last day, and then
yeah,
I won't get into the spiritual aspect, but I'm very spiritual, and so
right.
there's a whole other aspect I've experienced that suggests kind of the after, because I don't believe in organized religion, even though I was born in Ireland, which you wouldn't know unless I said that I was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and then
Huh?
you might,
Oh, it's right there.
yeah, so you can hear it when I say it that way. But
Yeah,
if I just said I was born in Ireland,
yeah.
you don't hear it as much. So I don't know. I can't explain it. I would love to get the Irish look back, but I can't. But I lived there for my first 6 years of life. Um, and the whole experience of living life in that way as an Irish Protestant, and
Right.
then finding the troubles, which this is early 70s, we're talking, there was three men in black masks literally appeared at my parents' door and kind of said that, you stop being friends with so and so or else. And 30 days later, I
Okay.
was living in Canada. That's how fast it happened.
Right.
Um, and that was purely for safety. But I also have jokingly come to refer to that as my first transition in life, my home
My God.
country. which is why I'm a British Canadian citizen, because I hold citizenship in both places.
Yeah.
But the story of religion was when, I was married in Canada. I'd married a French Canadian Catholic girl, and I converted. And I don't know if I've ever publicly told this story. I've told people, but you know, I didn't tell my parents that I'd converted because it was just still that sensitive of a topic. And it
Right.
wasn't until we invited them to the children's Christmas choir, which was at church. And after the children sang in the whole bit, I got up and served communion. Because I was very involved with the church.
Yeah.
And
There's no hiding
afterwards,
it really at that point, is there?
yeah. So afterwards, my mother said, "Don't you need to be Catholic to serve communion?" I went, "Yes." And that was the last we ever spoke of it.
Okay.
That was it. It wasn't a big deal for them, it turns out. And that was one of the things that, came from. So, and changing religions, by the way, that was my second big transition in life. It was fairly monumental,
Yeah, I
obviously,
can imagine.
but yeah, this is simply the third.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like it's those kinds of experiences that make me reflect and go, okay, like I'm really having to unpack
Yeah.
lots of layers and understanding things, that really gives me this perspective of the changes. And of course, coming back to live in the UK, now in London, um, it's again, I would call that another transition. I'm literally coming back and learning to live the life I never had as a British citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, kind of like coming full circle, but also in a very different way. It's like
Oh
some
yeah.
kind of spiral, a spiral of
Yeah.
ascension or something, is it? Every time you
Yeah.
learn something new about yourself,
Right.
it's like you've just leveled up. And that's what really stands out to me.
Hmm.
Like, I understand, you're describing them as transitions, but it is that piece of like, here's a new experience, here's some new information I've learned about myself.
Yeah.
And it's the same, it's the whole journey piece, isn't it? Like once you learn something, you can't unlearn it.
Right.
I find, like, there's no way, like, when I really, really understood like the concept of whiteness and being racialized and how it applies differently to different people. And I was like, huh, all of a sudden, like all these things slotted into place, and it's kind of, all right, well, I can't unknow that now.
Right.
I have forever been changed, and I will forever see the world in a different way until I learn a new piece of information that goes into that puzzle,
Yeah.
and something changes again. And it's almost like always a progressing movement, isn't it? There's always some sort of motion with it. You never roll back,
Yeah.
because our brains are just like, huh, that shifted.
Yeah.
Off we go. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess tongue in cheek, you could say that journey in life changes you. It certainly did
Yes.
for me.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But we all have those moments, don't we? I mean,
Yes.
admittedly, some are more acceptable within
Yeah.
society than others.
Right.
Some are more kind of associated with how we express ourselves than others.
Yeah.
But if we weren't having those kind of moments of like self-affirmation, or like,
Hmm.
what are we doing with our life? Like, how are we spending our
Yeah.
time? Honestly.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. It's I always say you have to wait for the book for all the other details on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
And is the book is in progress?
well, I'm working on 5 books.
Oh, okay. Why not? Sure.
Well, not actively in every case, but I'm actively thinking about kind of 5 different iterations. So the
Okay.
general themes, uh, are, the first one is I'm in a second edit of my actual book on acceptance without understanding. So
Mhm.
there will be one, I don't know when. I'm doing it as a labor of love when time fits,
Sure.
and I focus kind of on it, but it is explaining this whole idea of how I arrived at acceptance, but more importantly, how others, almost like a self-help book, how others can use it to apply in their own life.
Awesome.
So that will come out one day. The second one is my biography. The third one is, I used to run these sessions in my early days of running CAF services, and it used to be called 50 Years of Male Thinking for Women in 1 hour, because that's all they need. Um, and so the whole explanation behind that would be the third book. I want to write a book about the things I wish mothers would teach their sons about women.
Ah,
And the last one started off as a play that I was writing for a fringe festival. And it was meant to be an hour-long play. And I'm now turning it into a book. And it was because I didn't have the benefit of growing up as my mother's daughter, I never got the motherly advice that I might have otherwise
right.
received. And so what I do is I interview other women and I ask what's one piece of advice they got from their mother,
Yeah.
that they would share. And then I turn it into a vignette story. And
Oh,
so
fantastic.
the whole thing is a series of vignettes of stories I've collected from women all around the world.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will keep our eyes. And I mean, just from the stories that you've shared today, I want your biography
Yeah.
because I'm like, you've just dropped these little nuggets in, and I'm like, there is
Yeah.
so much behind all of that. You just like briefly the
Yeah.
troubles, and some people turned up at the door, and then we
Yeah.
left. And it's like, yeah, because that happens.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's going to be fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? It's a lot of people talk about how I inspire them and whatever.
Mm.
I don't get it. I accept it, but I don't get it because I'm just being me.
You're accepting it without understanding.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're even walking the talk, Cynthia.
You know what? I'm still learning though. I have so much to learn, especially my biases. Again, we all have biases.
You do.
Um, it's to your point earlier, we need to make the unconscious biases conscious. And when you do that, then you have choices to make,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
if you choose to, for the better of yourself and the better of society, then you do something about them. And I have biases that I'm doing work on that I'm not there. And yeah, like
Yeah.
that's what the journey is about.
Right. And that's ownership of it as well, isn't it? Just
Yeah,
accepting like we are only people. We like to your point about perfection, like it's not attainable. It's
no,
just not a thing. We need to let go of it because it reinforces so many harmful beliefs that
right.
things that we think they're attainable that just aren't. And I think once we kind of realize like that doesn't exist, stop chasing, everything
Yeah.
becomes a little bit easier, doesn't it? Like,
Well, it is. It is. And, we do see that reflected in, I don't want to start a whole new conversation when we're near the topic, but, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where he talks about self-actualization.
Mm.
And my therapist and I have debated this at nauseum. Can't believe I actually pay somebody to debate me about, but it's good because it challenges me to grow.
Yeah.
But I believe it's aspirational. In other words, we never actually achieve self-actualization. She felt we do.
Yeah.
She's the mental health professional, but this is my interpretation. So I would suggest that acceptance, like self-actualization, is always something you pursue, but you're never going to get right. You're never going to get perfect, which,
Yeah.
is what we encounter today when people go, well, especially when I talk about gender diversity and they go, I don't know, that's a sensitive topic these days. That's uncomfortable. What if I make a mistake? Like, how do I deal with it? And it's
Yeah.
trying to make everyone really feel safe to have a conversation that they will make a mistake. And I always
Exactly.
go, I'm the girl you can do that with.
Yeah.
Make the mistake with me. Allow me to help educate you, not to change your mind, but to educate
Yeah.
you. And then going forward, you can take it from there. And you know what? Making a mistake is so easy to fix.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. Well, so thank you for joining me today. Sid. This has been such a good conversation. And it's one of these conversations I know that we could fill a day if we
Yeah.
if we had the time. But what I would like to ask you, is there anything that you came today to say that you haven't had the opportunity to say yet?
Um, I want to ask the audience that sees this to help me. Um, as I said, haven't talked about my spiritual side, but acceptance without understanding is a message given to me by what I refer to as spirit.
Mm.
And this year, it's asked me to step up. And so I have the 1 billion challenge. That is to teach 1 billion people about acceptance without understanding by the year 2050. And I need help amplifying that message, having opportunities to spread that message, and be in places and spaces where we can talk about acceptance without understanding. So can you help me reach 1 billion people by the year 2050?
Over to you lot. Well, I think the answer to that is going to be yes, we can. Yes, we can. Because if we all share what we've learned from you today and we introduce your name to someone, just one other person, that ripple's going to be huge. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you. And how can people, because if we're going to get 1 million people behind you, how can people get hold of you, connect with you, follow you? Where are you found?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram and on TikTok as at CAF Services, all one word. You can find me on LinkedIn or X as C Fortlage, although that's much more of a tertiary platform for me. Business Connecting, LinkedIn. Find Cynthia Fortlage on LinkedIn to deal with it. I do have a Facebook page, but it's fallen even further behind than even the X platform these days. So those are really the key platforms. Reach out, connect. Please mention you heard about me. You digitally met me here. And yeah, I would love to connect with others and especially those interested in helping to meet the 1 billion challenge.
Yes, absolutely. What I would say, if people are going to reach out and connect, definitely make sure you mention the 1 billion challenge, because that will also help resonate the fact that the message is getting out there. So we need to reinforce that too. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this conversation today, Cynthia. It's been absolutely beautiful to speak to you again. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
You as well. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Bye.
Oh, awesome. That's wonderful. Do you know, it's so every time I heard you say something, I'm like, God, that's interesting. And at one point I was like, I've got so many questions, but we're going to roll
Yeah.
too many hours. So I'm like, I'm going to make a
Well,
little list and I'm going to send
yeah.
them to you. And then maybe you'll have to come back
Well, come back.
when you've got your 1 billion people influenced and educated. Come back
Oh,
and talk
that's
about
going to take a while, but along the way we can keep talking about it and keep bringing people
it.
along the
Yeah.
journey. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And I have to say, I did think about you as well
Hmm,
yesterday, because there's a series out. Did you say you're in London now?
I am.
Danny Dyer, who is I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a
Yep.
British actor. Yeah. So he's got a series out at the minute about God, I can't remember the title of it, but it's about like knowing men, or what is a man, or
Oh, yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And I started watching it, and it was actually better than I thought it would be.
Okay.
It still gave me some in moments.
Cringe.
But actually he's doing a lot
Yeah.
better job than I gave him credit for, so I felt a bit bad and judgy.
Yeah.
But he was really talking about when people end up finding themselves at the extreme of spaces, or no, when people don't talk about the middle, and this is what I didn't get to talk about today,
Yeah.
about not
Right.
speaking in the middle, people from the extremes come in and take up space in the middle
Yes.
anyway.
Yeah.
And then there's no ground for having the more rational, reasonable,
Yeah.
honest
Yeah.
conversations. And I thought about you when I was hearing that. I
Yeah.
was like, Cynthia's been in his ear.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's that. We didn't even talk about meeting in the middle,
I
but
know. I had that here and I was like, we ain't got time to get into that one.